So what if I add this phrase, okay? Americans discard 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour, enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks. I have people, and I say that to them, and they go like, yikes. In the first part, I say it's the 3.5 million plastic bottles an hour. Well, that sounds like a lot, but when I say it's enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks, their eyes explode. Like if you're talking to somebody and you're throwing left brain logic at them, often it goes in one ear and out the other.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is James I. Bond. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about James. 1, James is one of America's leading behavioral management and business marketing specialists, having worked with a who's who of American businesses. His breakthrough marketing book called Brain Glue, How Selling Becomes Much Easier by Making Your Ideas Sticky, is getting rave reviews by showing how using behavioral triggers has transformed hundreds of ordinary products into blockbusters of success by applying a few simple changes. 2, early in his career, he ran an advertising agency in Montreal, working with Fortune 500 and smaller clients. He's now based in sunny California. And 3, the third fact, he's also founder of the Father-Daughter Project to help improve relationships between fathers and daughters worldwide. What a worthy cause. As father of a son and 3 daughters, he discovered that his own relationship with his middle daughter wasn't as great as he thought. To help figure out how to be a better father, he interviewed more than 100 fathers of daughters, and this became the framework of the Father-Daughter Project. James I. Bond, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. Delighted to be talking with you. And let's talk about brain glue. How do we make ideas sticky?
There are certain triggers in the brain, okay? And if we can use those triggers, then it actually gets our ideas to stick in the brain and resonate with the right side of the brain. And you want to resonate with the right side of the brain because that's the emotion side. And all decisions are made. There are 2 major studies, one at Harvard University and one by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman. They discovered that more than 90% of decision-making, including financial decision-making, requires triggering the emotion side of the brain. Yeah, so what we want to do, we want to make ideas sticky. So I'm old enough to remember, I guess a lot of people do this. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, okay? I think the last time I heard that was like 60 years ago. I'm an old guy, okay? And yet on my deathbed, somebody could start by saying, Jack and Jill went, and I'll finish the whole phrase. Why do I remember it? Because it's poetry. Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel recognized this, and Dr. Seuss is filled with a rhyme. And so when O.J. Simpson was up for his trial, Johnny Cochran, his lawyer, he could have said, they found the glove, and they said, this is the glove of the guy who killed the woman, okay, his wife, and her boyfriend, I guess. So Johnny Cochran said, if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit. Even the lawyers use poetry. And I remember there was tons of evidence. They had 2 of the jurors sitting next to each other being interviewed by a journalist. And the journalist asked, well, with all that evidence against OJ, why did you acquit him? Why did you find him, let him go? And one said it while the other was nodding her head. And she said, well, we knew if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. The glove didn't fit, so we had to acquit. Poetry. And poetry is really powerful, but that's only one of the tools of brain glue. But we recognize that I came from a logical background, mechanical engineering. And so although I ran a behavioral management firm in Southern California for 13 years, lucky 13, by the way, because I've always been fascinated by the psychology of why people do things. You know, when we understand if you throw too much logic at a person, it literally turns off the right side of the brain, which is the emotion side of the brain. And so it becomes harder to get them to make a decision. Okay. I remember I was working with a finance company focusing on the behavioral management side. Okay. I don't want to say who this person was, but they were talking to somebody who's a world famous musician. And I know what they were doing because I was teaching them how to market this thing, this service, this tool that they had. And so this one guy was talking to this famous musician, and he said, blah, 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 you could make as much as 12% on this. And you could see that guy's eyes were glazing over, you know? I mean, I try to remind these guys, have you any idea how many people hated math in school and you're throwing math at them? But he said, yes, I mean, you can make up to 12% on this. It's really good. And the guy's eyes were glazing over. And so I came over because I know how this worked. And I said, well, actually, just so you know, John Lennon, before he died, actually invested in this too. And that's why when he died, so much of his money was retained by the family and, and his estate. And the guy went, oh, John Lennon did it. Yeah, I definitely will do it. You know, and it helps you understand. So I've got this great quote. Okay. I mean, this great statistic. Americans discard 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
2.5 million, yeah.
2.5 million bottles. How much is that? When somebody throws the number at you, what does it mean? So what if I add this phrase, okay? Americans discard 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour, enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks. I have people, and I say that to them, and they go like, yikes. You know, in the first part, I say it's the 3.5 million plastic bottles an hour. Well, that sounds like a lot, but when I say it's enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks, their eyes explode like, wow, are you kidding? That's how much we discard? And so we have to understand that if you're talking to somebody and you're throwing left brain logic at them, often it goes in one ear and out the other. I mean, there has to be emotion. If they like you or trust you, there's emotion there, okay? If you're talking to the masses and you're just throwing emotion at them, or you're running an advertising campaign or a social media post or whatever else, and you're just throwing logic at them, often it just goes in one ear and out the other. And that's why when you can introduce brain glue into a phrase, it triggers different parts of the brain and makes the people much more responsive to what you're pitching. Does that make sense?
And James, so tell me if I'm hearing right. I'm hearing possibly 3 different techniques there that you just described, you demonstrated. You started by talking about the rhyming. Mm-hmm. And so that's one technique to reach the brain. And then you talked about the 3.5 million bottles, and you gave it a visual context,
right?
So a different right. way of glue. And the other one was, tell me what that was again.
I don't know, but I don't remember. I'm getting old.
There's 2 of us.
But I will tell you, I have 14 of these things that are really amazing. I mean, think of, if anybody remembers Kurt Cobain, and he had a song called Smells Like Teen Spirit. Ew, what does Teen Spirit smell like? Is that like a locker room? And yet he did sensory elevation, I call it, as one of them. You know, there used to be ads for Alka-Seltzer, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is, okay? Because they're using sensory elevation. So just by hearing the words plop, plop, fizz, fizz, you know, it awakens your senses and the right side of your brain, the emotion side of your brain. And so, you know, Kurt Cobain recognized it. I mean, if it smells like Teen Spirit is memorable, I talk to people who don't even know the song. I can sing it. I'm not going to sing it right now. I'm not going to torture your audience here, or you. But I mean, they remember the name of the song, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And so it's sensory elevation is one of them. I had an advertising agency in Montreal. I worked my way up and we won major clients like Kraft, Timex, Avon, Abbott Laboratories, Seagram's, their world headquarters is in Montreal. I had good connections because people were really excited because of the quality work that I was doing, that we were doing for them. Logical, okay? And so we had an opportunity to win the anti-drug campaign in America. It was really going to be prestigious and it was going to be fun and we're making a big difference to people and all that stuff. And so we came up with logical reasons why you shouldn't do drugs. And they loved it. And then we saw what we lost to. And when I saw what we lost to, I knew they should have won. They're a gazillion times better than my logic. And so there are 2 issues. The first one was, so it's a guy holding an egg and says, this is your brain. And then he cracks the shell and drops the egg into a sizzling frying pan and says, this is your brain on drugs. Any questions? When I saw that, 2 things happened. One is I knew they should have won. It was profoundly better than anything that I could have come up with, which is the second problem I had, which was this was emotional selling. And I had no clue how to do emotional selling. I came from a logical background. And so I could tell you logical reasons why, but emotional reasons, things that trigger the emotion parts of the brain, are much profoundly impactful than logic. And so I realized that school doesn't teach us how to do emotional selling. Okay. And libraries didn't have any, it had only superficial things on emotional selling. So what I did was I created a passion box. I took a box and I wrote on a 3x5 card, "Your brain on drugs." So I'd remember that ad. And then I put it in a box. And I said, anytime I come up, I see something that's emotional selling, even if it's a phrase that somebody says, like President John F. Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." No, that was interesting. I later learned it's called chiasmus, which is a flip. It's like the opposite of rhyme. Winners never quit and quitters never win. It's like a flip. If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. It's a flip. I heard a comedian say, use chiasmus. He said, "I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy." So even comedians use it. When we go to a doctor's office, my wife would just really get mad at me because I'd be going through one of the magazines and I go, "Oh, this is a fantastic ad." And she would go, "Do not tear it out of the magazine." So I have to put it in my box. This is incredible. And so she would sit as far away from me as possible. So I pretended she didn't even know me. Okay. But I would put these things in my box. After we moved to California, I met John Gray. And John Gray was telling me how he wrote a book called Men, Women, and Relationships. And it was fabulous. But he was frustrated. He sold about 20,000 copies. When you're writing a book, 20,000 copies, it sounds like a lot, but it's not really. Okay. I mean, for all the work you put into a book and writing it and all that stuff. He's at a seminar where he's trying to promote the book. And he said something, and all the women started laughing hysterically. And the men looked at the women like, what was so funny about what he just said? And so he said, you see, I mean, women find certain things funny and men don't. Men find certain things funny and women don't. And not everything, but some things. And one woman screams out from the audience, "It's almost like men are from a different planet." And he laughs and said, "I guess men are from Mars." It's like men are from Mars. And everybody laughed, men and women. When he got home, he thought, okay, if men are from Mars, where are women from? Women are from Venus because Venus is the god of love. So, and then he got this crazy idea. What if I change the title of my book? The Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And I'll go through the book and I'll just put like references to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, but it will be the same book, but I'll refer it to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus over and over again. What do you think happened? Almost overnight, he sold 500,000 copies, then 1 million, then 2 million. You know how many books he sold? 50 million books. By the way, at $10 a book, that's, $500 million, $500 million. I mean, that's amazing. He went from 20,000 books to 50 million books just because he changed the title. He changed the title enough that a gazillion people wanted to buy the book. I remember being in a bookstore and I'm looking at books and I go, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Oh, that's funny. What's that? I picked it up. That's what you want, right? In a bookstore or, you pick it up. You pick it up, there's a greater chance you're going to buy the book. So when I got home, I was going to put the book inside my passion box. Then I thought, no, this is too important. This is powerful. And so what I did was I put the book on the bed and I dumped my passion box, which had a gazillion things. I've been doing this for 35 years, filling the passion box. So I got a lot of stuff in there. But I dumped it onto my bed and I said, this is the logic guy in me. Let me look for patterns. Are there patterns? Okay. So the first pattern I got was a metaphor. So Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We're not really from Mars. Ladies out there, I don't think we're really from Mars. We might be. I mean, maybe actually, but no. But it's a metaphor, okay, or analogy. So I said, okay, well, what else has a metaphor analogy? So the second one was Shark Tank. If you ever watch Shark Tank on TV, it's not a tank full of sharks. I mean, it might feel like it if you're on the show, but it's not a tank full of sharks. But it's a metaphor, okay? I mean, if they called it Investors Club, do you think it would be as successful as Shark Tank? No way. The fact that it's called Shark Tank and it's a metaphor, it triggers different parts of their brain. It makes it sound like, wow, this is fun and we got to watch this, okay? Then I realized, I was watching on the History Channel about Rocky Road ice cream. Dreyer's ice cream was started about the Great Depression. They were the first, they had chocolate, vanilla, strawberry ice cream. Those are the three. So he said, why don't we add nuts to chocolate ice cream and marshmallows? What do we call it? Well, it's kind of like it's bumpy. It's like a bumpy road. Why don't we call it Rocky Road? They came up with the term Rocky Road and the sales exploded. They became a monster of success. Okay, so Rocky Road has a few things going for it that are brain glue tools. The first one is it's a metaphor. Okay, it's not really, you don't get rocks in it when you open it up. Hey, want some Rocky Road ice cream? No, I don't want rocks. Thanks. There aren't rocks in it, so it's a metaphor. The second thing is it uses something called alliteration. repeating sound, rocky road, ruh. And as I started investigating, I realized how many major brands use alliteration. Coca-Cola, PayPal, Best Buy, TikTok, Lululemon. Some girls were telling me, hey, you're missing any girl stuff, Lululemon. But, think of TikTok. If they called it the Chinese social media, you think it would have as many people on it as TikTok? No way. Okay. And so alliteration works. They also use humor. And humor can be really powerful too. It triggers actually oxytocin in the brain. It actually makes people much more receptive to your ideas or products if you can say a joke. And I'm terrible at joke telling, but I still practice and people laugh even though they realize I'm just trying. I'm really a bad joke teller. So Rocky Road was launched during the Great Depression. In the 30s or whatever it was, the Great Depression. And so the Great Depression had a nickname. It was called Rocky Road. We're all on a rocky road. So Rocky Road ice cream, one of the things they would say is, we're all on a rocky road. We might as well eat Rocky Road ice cream, and made people smile, And then they went, okay, and they started buying it. And so when I realized, wow, these things are tools and I could divide them up into like 14 different categories, it blew my mind because I went like, wow, these are actual categories that stick to the brain like glue, that make it easier to sell stuff. So I had a client in Southern California who was a construction company. I had no experience with construction companies. I do now because I work with them and others since then. But there were three partners who after 10 years had 2 million in sales. That's not bad. 2 million in sales after 10 years. I mean, it's a construction company, so a lot of it is costs and things like that. But still, in 1 year by applying brain, so it was one of the first companies I started applying brain glue with. I said, hey, I have this thing. Let me try this. In 1 year, I took them from 2 million to 10 million. It took them 10 years to go to 2 million. I took them in 1 year to 10 million. And then 2 years later, they reached 32 million in sales. So how did I do it? So the first thing I did as a marketing consultant, I focus on behavioral management. As a marketing consultant, I got a whiteboard and I said, let's make a list of every different type of client you go after. Okay. So it was a massive board. It took a while, who else, what else kind of companies, I went through some of their files. Oh yeah, we work with this type of company and that type of company, et cetera. And then I said, okay, we're going to play a game. And the game is you have to pick one type of company you're going to focus on and only focus on them and refuse working with everybody else. And they said, well, we can't do that, because they would do it for homes and groups of homes in a community and manufacturing facilities. They would say no to nobody. Okay. And I said, I understand that. We're not going to get you to say no yet. I just want you to focus on, if you had to pick one that you were just going to focus on this one, who would you pick? What would you pick? And they said, okay, after a lot of soul searching and brain searching, they came up with a fire restoration for insurance companies, meaning every time an insurance company's client has a fire, you have to go in and first check, did the frame get damaged? If it does, you have to tear down the whole house. If the frame isn't damaged, then you can build a house around it, but make sure it isn't going to catch fire again because you have, all those types of things. So there's a process you go through. And I said, okay, fire restoration for insurance companies. So every time an insurance company's client has a fire. So let's come up with a really cool name and the way to describe it. And so I came up with this concept. Why don't we call you guys the fire extinguisher for insurance companies? I use the word fire because the client is going to think of fire. So fire something. And so we said fire extinguisher is a good one. So, and we'll call it Fire X. Okay. And so now they would go in and pitch to insurance companies. They would say, just think of us as the fire extinguisher for you guys. Okay. Every time your client has a fire, we're the fire extinguisher. You want to bring in the fire extinguisher. And sales exploded from 2 million to 10 million in sales. And then they went to 32 million. It blew their mind so much that they recognized we don't want to sell to anybody else because there's too much money we can make just from focusing on fire restoration for insurance companies. And because it's fun to say, hey, we're the fire extinguisher, it blew their minds because it was adding that fun, easy to remember phrase made it easy for them to go to, from 2 million to 32 million in sales. It was amazing. And so I started to realize that this is powerful stuff. And I do volunteer work for the U.S. Small Business Administration where I'm a past workshop chairman, and I do workshops there and seminars. And we would have, sold out, packed workshops. We didn't get paid for it, but, they paid for a room and stuff with the Small Business Administration paying for it. And would just teach this to people, and it just blew their minds. And people would come back after and just grab me in the hall or at a grocery store and say, well, my wife and I were at a grocery store and said, we tried this brain glue thing with your husband. And boy, it was so amazing. I wasn't trying to get that. It was a little embarrassing. But it was fun because it applies to so many different types of businesses. In fact, let me give you, so this book used to be called, I'm embarrassed to say, only because I'm a logical person, so I fall back to logic. It was called Sell More with the Right Brain Marketing Strategy. That is a left brain title. Okay. People, when I changed the name, by the way, they were so happy because they could never remember what the title of the book was. So I had Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and the series. And so he sold 500 million books. So you have 100 million Chicken Soup for the Soul and 400 million of the Chicken Soup for the teenage soul, Chicken Soup for a cancer survivor soul, things like that. So 500 million books. The guy's massively wealthy. He doesn't need me to tell him anything. But he got mad at me. He said, I had a chance to meet with him. He said, you just really pissed me off. I said, sorry, what did I do? He said, I was just going to read a little bit of your book and I couldn't put the thing down. This was amazing. He said, in fact, I'm buying books for everybody in my company. I'm requiring everybody to read the book, which is like, really? Thank you. Only on one condition. You have to change the title of the book. You can't call it Sell More with the Right Brain Marketing Strategy. That's stupid. It's a left brain title. You have to call it Brain Glue, because the whole book is about brain glue. I said, okay, do I have to? He said, yes, you have to. I read your book, and you've got to follow your process. So, so it's brain glue is what it's called. But it's just, it makes us recognize, also made me recognize how easy it is to fall back to the way we are. I'm a logical person. I'm looking for logical, solutions. And so I wanted to describe what the book is like. It's, you sell more if you use a right brain approach. Okay, our emotional approach to trigger the right brain, but it's about brain glue. And he said, you're a brain glue guy, so you got to your book has to be called Brain Glue. I'm the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy. In fact, he was telling me we wanted to come up with a really fancy title, and I thought one day I woke up and it's almost like eating chicken soup, because chicken soup makes you feel better if you're sick. So he was originally going to call it Chicken Soup for the Spirit. He was telling me. And they said, but it doesn't sound right, spirit. And then SOUP, SOUL. It's alliteration. It's a repetition of sound. Chicken Soup for the Soul sounds better than Chicken Soup for the Spirit. And then he came up with Chicken Soup for the Soul. And he says, I think, based on reading your book, if I call it Chicken Soup for the Spirit, it probably wouldn't be as successful. And so it's like, wow, I'm getting people who I think are massively successful. He's telling me, I wish I'd read your book a lot earlier, because I've published like 65 other books. And, they're bestsellers, but a lot of them are bestsellers because he's so famous, because, his book, and he was on a movie called The Secret and all that stuff. And it helped him become so famous that people would go out of their way to get anything that he published. I mean, they're good books. He's an awesome, awesome writer. But he's realizing I would have changed titles of some of my books having read yours now. It's like, okay, thank you, So, but anyway, that's how powerful Brain Glue is, because it just triggers enough parts of the brain that people actually want to buy what you're selling.
James, so I'm hearing that the thinking of renaming a company, renaming a product or service, renaming a book, even renaming a campaign or a program can have, just by that itself, can drastically change the results. So how does a person know that it's time to change the name?
Well, you could be like me and you sell, or like John Grader, he sold 20,000 copies and he wasn't happy. I mean, we're focusing on your intended message, right, George? And so your intended message is, I remember Zig Ziglar saying this, because I started in sales. And I had built an advertising company and I started in sales. And I was like, I had a brother who was selling for me. So that was great. But once we departed, I love my brother, but not in business. Okay. Family and business doesn't always mix. I had to learn how to sell. And it terrified me. I felt like a car salesman, like, oh, nobody likes salesmen and all that stuff. Now I know, the greatest salesmen in the world are Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, believe it or not, all these other people, okay? And selling is honorable. But Zig Ziglar said, you don't have to teach anybody how to sell. I mean, he had a sales program, it was really fantastic. But he said, the bottom line is you have to understand, you don't have to teach anybody how to sell. Selling is a transference of passion. If you're passionate about something, like if you saw a movie, I saw a movie, Hidden Figures, okay, which is really, I love that movie, about the 3 Black women who were in NASA at the beginning of the going to the moon and all that stuff. And I love that movie. Nobody has to teach me how to sell that. I know how to sell that. It's like, oh, you have to see this. Oh, wow, it's a great, like, okay. I mean, I took Toastmasters. My wife said they taught him how to talk. They just didn't teach him how to shut up. So I get, wives will do that, But the point is, I recognize this when I'm talking to somebody and helping them. Like I work with a paint company and they said, yeah, paint is all boring. I said, are you kidding? Can you get passionate about it? And so we started recognizing that their paint was actually used in the movie Titanic. that they actually he painted the ship and all that stuff because it had certain effects on different types of paint that it would actually not get dissolving on salt water, first of all, but it will also have certain textures they had and everything else. In fact, they were paint and coatings. And I said, what's coatings? And that's, all paint is a coating. And so I said, oh, okay, well, that means we can change the coatings to different things. But what do you guys love if you're passionate about it? They said, we're guitar players. So there was Gibson Guitar was just not far from this company. I said, let's see if we can set up a lab for Gibson Guitar in our studio, in our company, and we'll actually put coatings on their guitars so we can actually come up with really cool coatings for their guitars. They won Gibson as a client, but they went from being, oh, this is boring paint, to being like, I put posters of Titanic all around the place. Said, we're the guys that did Titanic. And when you raise the level of passion, suddenly sales went up, And so the first thing you have to do is you have to be passionate, but you also have to understand how to transfer passion. And that's why Brain Glue is so powerful, because you want to be able to transfer the passion so that people can, feel. I mean, like I go back to the quote that I said, Americans discard 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour. I feel bad about that. That's terrible. But what does it mean if I say it's enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks? Now I have an intended message, and my message is, it isn't just words throwing at you. My intended message is, I want you to understand how terrible, plastic is. Now, I love plastic, but I'm just saying it's really powerful. In fact, so I had this lady, because Brain Glue doesn't just work for products and services that we're selling, okay? It also works in persuasion. So Malcolm X was a civil rights leader in America, okay? Black civil rights leader. He was fabulous. And so he came up with a phrase, which is chiasmus, which I talked about a little bit in the beginning, which is a flip of rhyme. Instead of rhyme is A-B-A-B, chiasmus is A-B-B-A. It's like, some of the, let me get some of them because I forget them sometimes.
Can't be with the one you love the one you're with.
Exactly. There you go. Okay. So he said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock landed on us. That's much more memorable than saying, you have no idea how hard it's been being black in America. Okay. Okay, that'll go in one or out the other, okay? But if he says, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock, the rock landed on us, it's like, oh, interesting. He said, when you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything, okay? Mae West was really funny because she would do a lot of those things too. Anyway, but let me tell you, so let me give you some Mae West jokes since I set it up first, okay? Mae West was like hilarious. Mae West was at the beginning of the movie business and all that stuff. And she said, it's not the men in your life that matters, it's the life in your men. It's better to be looked over than overlooked. Women like a man with a past, but they prefer a man with a present. I love that one. When women go wrong, men go right. After them. Good girls go to heaven, bad girls go everywhere. She was hilarious. But so then this mommy asked me, she says, I've got twins, 2 young twins, and I've got a 14-year-old boy. And so does Brain Glue work with my twins? I try to get them to bed. I read a story to them at night. And then they want another story and another story. And it drives me crazy. I want them to go to bed. So can you help me? And I said, well, okay, let's practice with this. Let's come up with a poem. So when the story's read, it's time for bed. That works. Okay. So let's try that one. So tell them when the story's read, it's time for bed. Okay. And have them repeat it. So she came back and she said, it worked. It was great. I told them I'll read you a story, but when the story's read, it's time for bed. So when the story's read, and they said, okay, mommy, it's time for bed. And so she said, I read the story. And they said, mommy, another one. I said, when the story's read, okay, mommy, it's time for bed. And they went to bed. Okay. Said it worked. So now you have to help me with my 14-year-old. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be the expert in this, which I am, but still. So I said, why, what happened with him? And he said, why do we have to follow so many rules in life, mommy? That's a tough question. So I said, okay, so let's start with rhyme. What rhymes with rules? Fools. So why don't we say only fools don't follow rules? Okay, that's a starting point. But let's make it even stronger by putting an analogy in there also. So I came up with an analogy and we tried it on him and it was amazing. So I sat down with her son and her, and I said, so you were asking your mom, why do we have to follow so many rules in life, right? And he said, yeah. So I said, well, when you're thirsty, you can drink out of the toilet, but why would you want to? Remember, only fools don't follow rules. And then he goes, oh, that makes sense. When do you ever get a 14-year-old ever saying that makes sense? Never. I escaped before he asked me another question, by the way. But did it really make sense? Or was I just triggering parts of the brain? And so in politics, they have these 2 phrases that always got my attention. And the first phrase is, which goes along the same lines, is you can't hug a child with nuclear arm. It's an anti-nuclear arms one. Well, it doesn't really make sense, but people go, yeah, because you're, hug a child. So you're talking about emotion. You're bringing emotion into it, hugging a child with nuclear arms, and you're putting something like, an atom bomb, And so you can't hug a child with nuclear arms. It has power when you say it that way. Instead of saying, hey, I'm against nuclear arms, that's not the same as you can't hug a child with nuclear arms. And here's another one. Now, I'm not against the gun control. I'm from Canada originally, but I don't have guns, but I'm not doing this for political reasons. But I was impressed by the power of this because it uses brain glue. And the comedian said, this is chiasmus, okay? Flipping. The right to bear arms is almost as crazy as the right to arm bears. I mean, like, what? And I see people, I say that, and I see some people who are really into it, like, go, yeah, they laugh while they're nodding their head. Does it really make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. And yet, but it triggers a part of the brain. When you activate the emotion side of the brain, then it makes sense. I mean, a lot of people who sell, they always say know, like, trust. Okay. We always talk about that in marketing. Well, why are we saying that? Because they don't know you. So passion, to trigger the right side of the brain, the emotion side of the brain, you've got to like you and trust you. That's why one of the things I try to teach people, I ran a behavioral management company. And whenever we go into clients, I try to train my people, I didn't try to say a joke or say something engaging in the beginning that will really get people going. And the reason is because when you trigger emotion in the person at the beginning, especially if you say a joke, then they become much more receptive to whatever you're teaching them or training them. We ran a training company, so we wanted people to be receptive because they come in and they're thinking, I just had an argument with the guy downstairs. We just lost a big client, everything else. How do you train somebody who's into that? Okay, so I would say a joke like, in one company I did a turnaround for, I said, so the maintenance man is hiding in the maintenance closet. And every time people come up near the maintenance closet, he opens the door and screams, supplies, And so not the greatest joke, but I think it's funny. I was working with this company and we were going through a turnaround, a martial arts equipment company. They make boxing gloves and all kinds of martial arts equipment and stuff. And it's scary when you're going through a turnaround because the company's in trouble and people are afraid they're going to lose their job and they're stressed and everything else. And I needed them to be much more creative and, active and interactive with clients and with us coming up with new products and things like that. And so by telling them that joke, to show you the power that joke had, I would stick my head into somebody's office and say, hey, how's it going? And they would go, supplies. For a year I was working with them, and I would, not every single time, but I would say a third of the time I would, stick my head in their office or, over their desk and say, how's it going? Their answer was supplies, and they would go from, you could see stress to, oh, supplies, I'm the supplies guy. But just because the power of humor, I saw pictures of famous American presidents. And if you see they're with the head of Russia and they're both laughing hysterically. I saw one with Bill Clinton and Gorbachev, I think, or whoever it was, and they're laughing. And because they're laughing, you figure that, okay, they must be connecting, and therefore we're probably not going to get nuclear bombs fired at us, So, yeah, it's just, I never thought of the power of emotional selling and how profoundly it boosts selling. But I mean, and I'll go back to John Gray. He went from a small number of books to 50 million books. Hey, everybody out there, including you, George. How many, you have 50 million people on your podcast? Not yet. We're on our way, though, And so we want to remember that your intended message, like your message is not just words. It's not just numbers, but it's passion and emotion. And when you can transfer that emotion to the other person or transfer emotion to the other person, they're more likely to buy from you.
And James, people who are interested in the book, of course, they can find it on Amazon. They also can go to the website braingluebook.com, and they can find that link in the description below. James, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could talk to a business leader who is in a competitive market, whether it's they're in accounting, they're in law, they're in plumbing. And if you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice about how to convey their message, whether it's the name of the company, the name of the business, or a slogan, what might be that 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice that you would give them to get them in the right direction?
Sell from passion. Okay. I'll give you a great example. I'll give you 2 examples. One is a guy who made an electric razor that shaves man's private areas. Okay. Private parts. And so we're thinking, okay, and he didn't want to offend people, but he wanted to make it clear what he was offering. So he went analogy, and analogy is a great one to do. And pick the craziest analogy to think of first, and then you can work your way down. Often the craziest analogy could be the best. So what was his analogy? It's just like a lawnmower. So he called the product the lawnmower and generated like over 100 million of sales because he came up with this crazy title, the lawnmower. People went, you see that shaver? That's the lawnmower. So not only do people want to buy the product, but they want to share the name. Hey, guess what I just bought? I bought the lawnmower. What? Yeah, it shaves private parts. It's amazing. People knew what it is, and they came up with a crazy idea. So Carrie Smith had a company, and he ended up buying a small company to add to his company, and they made it really huge fans for farms. Because, on a farm, you have cows. You're not going to have air conditioning in the barn, but you could have a big fan and put a big fan up there. And so that's an easy way to do this. And so they made really large fans. It was really good. He eventually figured out how I can sell it to industrial companies and construction, and big factories and stuff like that too. And so he came up with this ad that was really funky. And he said, if you're talking to a person, what would you call it? It's not just a big fan, it's a big ass fan. So he came up with big ass fans, and sales took off like crazy. And he was so much so that he changed the company's name to Big Ass Fans. And eventually, after 15 years, he sold it for, get ready for this, $500 million. Okay. But along the way, he was Big Ass Fans, and as he was changing the name to Big Ass Fans, he recognized, I want to sell other products, not just fans. And it distracted him. And because it distracted him, he realized, wait a second, I'm selling Big Ass Fans. That's selling like crazy. Everything else, we're making low profit margins and it's not doing that well. Let's just focus on Big Ass Fans. And by focusing, which is my set, the first one is think of an analogy that's really crazy. And then, about how to describe your product or service. Okay. It's just like, we had a behavioral management firm. And so people didn't understand what we did. So we came up with this analogy, and it became easier to sell. We're just like a personal trainer. Personal trainer shows up at your house at 5 a.m. If they show up at my house at 5 a.m., I'd throw them out. But anyway, they show up at your house really early, and they get you to do push-ups and sit-ups and whatever else, okay? Well, maybe you can do 10 push-ups by yourself. But if you have a personal trainer pushing you, you'll do 20 or 30 push-ups. Come on, you can do two more. Yeah, you got it, okay? And we do that with your senior management. We'll take them and tackle stuff outside their comfort zone. Not massively outside the comfort zone, but slightly outside the comfort zone. And if you get all your key people tackling something outside your comfort zone, your company will take off like gangbusters. And so by using the analogy, that was really powerful. So that was the first thing. And then the second is think of an analogy. I mean, Brain Glue has lots of tools, but analogy is a good one to start with, okay? And a crazy one, the crazier the better. Think outside the box. And the second one is focus. If you can identify, like I did with the construction company, identify the different markets you're going after. Can you focus on what would happen if you focus just on one? And you want to experiment, make sure it's worthwhile for you. But I can't tell you how many companies we've worked with, and they think I'm brilliant, but I just have this thing I do. Let's simplify it down and focus on one. Steve Jobs did that. They had so many products, and he created a table and said, if it doesn't fit on the table, we're not selling it. This was a small table. And they said, but we have all these products. I don't care. It's got to simplify it. So what happened? He became the most valuable company on the planet, okay? Because he simplified. So you can simplify your message. It becomes really powerful. And the third one is just, have passion about what you're selling. Like I go back to my, my paint company that I was working with, I mean, to them, it was just boring paint. I mean, how excited can you get about paint? And you can get really, really excited. I mean, I found out they had this guy who invented paint for the airplane, for the airline industry, had patents on it. And I never thought of this before. He's explained it to me. He said, an airplane, you have to have a thin coat of paint because paint is heavy. We don't realize that it makes the plane heavier. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's got to retain its color because it's going way up there where there isn't enough, the rays of sun are burning on it. You can't have a plane land and you've got faded paint on your plane. You're going to think, are we getting in that plane? And the third one is you have big temperature changes it has to go through because it could be really hot up there and it lands in snow. Okay. So it's, it's got to be able to withstand it without cracking because it's going through this massive change of temperature. And I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. I started sharing with the other people. They went, oh yeah, we know that. I said, but that's amazing. And they went, well, actually, yeah. I said, I want every one of you to go home and share it with your spouse or kids and tell them about airplane paint and see if they don't get fascinated. And people would come back and say like, I can't believe they actually thought it was amazing. It's like, yes, sometimes you're selling a product or service for such a long period of time, you forget how interesting or exciting it is. Those are my three.
Powerful advice, James. My guest today is James I. Bond, reminding you that men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.